We don't think that our universe is part of a bigger ensemble that obeys laws. Even if it's part of the multiverse is not part of a bigger ensemble that obeys laws. Therefore, nothing gives us the right to demand some kind of external cause. The idea that our intuitions about cause and effect that we get from the everyday experience of the world in this room should somehow be extended without modification to the fundamental nature of reality is fairly absurd.
The gentleman you just heard is atheist and cosmologist Dr. Sean Carroll, attempting to explain that our understanding of causality doesn't apply to the universe. But if we strip away our basic understanding of cause and effect, we essentially undermine the entire enterprise of science. As the legendary character Spock in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock says, quote, "As a matter of cosmic history, it has always been easier to destroy than to create," end quote. Though a line from a Hollywood movie, it is nonetheless true. Even if Dr. Carroll were successful in making the universe safe for atheism, as James Sinclair says, there is nothing within the often polemical opposition to Christian theism that offers any explanation or hope as to how we ought to think of our place in the universe at this very moment, or how we should treat one another. Models of the universe that attempt to get around the idea of God and the origin of our universe may have logically sound mathematical equations, but do these models transfer into any kind of physical reality? Would human beings be able to inhabit them, or are they just models of destruction?
We both believe that if you're going to be an intellectually honest theist, you need to accord with the best data from the universe. And as we both agree, science is not in the job of proving things with metaphysical certitude. It says that models get better and better at fitting the data. I think that works just as well for theism as it does for naturalism.
Our guest on this episode is physicist and Christian James Sinclair, who here in part 2 helps us understand two difficulties for which naturalistic paradigms of our universe must give an account: time and entropy. What is the nature of time? And what exactly is entropy, and why do these factors pose significant problems for naturalistic models of the cosmos? How are they best explained by the existence of God rather than secular science? We also tackle the big questions of why any of this matters. One may look around and declare that we are insignificant in the cosmos, but as human beings, we certainly do not live as though that were true. Our value, worth, and significance are not determined by our size, location in the cosmos, or science. We are significant because we are made in the image and likeness of our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ. Here again is James Sinclair.
There's an entity which must transcend the universe itself. And the moment you get there, then I'm no longer asking questions about, I'm not stuck in what I call the Sherlock Holmes conundrum, where you remember in what Sherlock Holmes in one of those mysteries said something to the effect that, hey, we've just looked at all the hypotheses and all of them are absurdly impossible, unlikely. However, one of them must be true. Okay. So, or so-and-so doesn't look like it could possibly be guilty, but it must be because somebody is. That's kind of where you get, and if you go into mathematics and Bayesian probability arguments, you're getting into this idea of what I call the prior probability, which I think is a good structure. If you want to go math, that's what we're talking about. But that's the Sherlock Holmes conundrum. Or that happens in the resurrection argument too. I've got 18 different atheist explanations of why the body wasn't in the tomb despite the resurrection, and they're all absurdly unlikely. But if God is out there and he resurrected, and there was a resurrection, isn't a that your abductive reasoning now. If the list of possibilities doesn't include God, then one of these other things has to be true, right? Doesn't matter how, this is Richard Carrier's argument, doesn't matter how absurdly improbable. This is where Kalam gets you past that initial barrier. It said, look, there's got to be a cause. And initially, in the simple Kalam argument, it's a small c, because we don't know what the nature of it is yet. All we know is the universe is contingent, it's dependent, because that in philosophy is what you mean by contingency. It's an entity which is dependent on something else for its existence. Okay. It's dependent on what? Something. Okay.
Right.
What
Small
is that
c.
something?
Small c.
The moment you go there, I've got a something which goes on my list of explanations because it's capable of creating universes. Okay. And that's, now I can do the abductive reasoning. So this is how you structure a Christian apologetic. Even with respect to the resurrection, how do I deal with the fact of the prior probability, the Richard Carrier prior probability, for God's existence? I said, look, we're showing a direct argument, and the metaphysical arguments for God's existence, the direct metaphysical, like the Thomas Aquinas arguments. Robert Spitzer has some arguments in a book that he put out a couple of years ago, for example. I think 5 New Proofs for Existence of God was the name of it. These are metaphysical arguments, okay, which get you past the issue with the abductive reasoning, and it puts God on the list of explanations. And now I can go over here and make my abductive reasoning in the various arguments that we use that route. So that's where I am sitting there while Sean Carroll's giving his opening address in this debate. Is that he's making accusations about you're doing certain things, and that God is a bad theory. It doesn't fit into the proper way to do reasoning about where you get knowledge from is basically what he's talking about. And I said, I'm not doing any of those things. And I said, well, gee, I hope that we have a chance to talk about all of this, but the debate format, it would be nice if there was a continuing conversation or have another debate. The follow-up.
Yeah, well, the nature of debates, formal debates, is very it's very limited. So,
but it was very worth doing.
Yeah.
If you look at what happened, it was 2014, I think, between 1996 and 2014. What happened in the intellectual milieu, so to speak? What happened are that people like Lawrence Krauss, Alan Guth, Sean Carroll felt a need to speak at the public level about this argument. That was the real significance of the debate in 2014.
Yeah.
That, okay, you need to please get out there and talk about it. So it was definitely worth doing. It was a positive event, and it was a mutual talking back and forth on the same stage. We're still talking past each other to some degree, but at least we're talking. And I guess we're still kind of in that place where that's still possible. Okay, so there's been some development since then with regard to, we know a little bit more string theory than we used to. You can get into the different kind of multiverses. What do we think is going on? The Kalam argument, I think, is still pretty much where it was. Remember, the main debate, and this kind of got put aside. Okay. Let's just talk about, we're talking about the initial part. The initial part was, what's the nature of causation? Is it even an allowed question? Are theists doing stupid things about philosophy of something? This is Sean Carroll's argument. I'm saying, let's put that mess over here. I think that's, if you just let me tell you what I'm doing, which I explained a little bit about, I think you can deal with that. And I think, actually, let me make a larger point. Here's a point where maybe I disagree with Dr. Carroll. And this is going to be a little scary for Christians because I'm going to use the E word, evolution. Okay. But I don't mean Darwin's evolution. Okay. What I mean is what I call capital E evolution, which things change with respect to time as
Sure.
acted on by laws of physics. Okay, I come from that physical metaphysic, that's really a metaphysical statement. What is the nature of really going on? There are laws. I'm a necessitarian, and as opposed to a regularist. That's the name of the debate in philosophy. Like if you see regular things happen, like the apple comes off the tree and falls to the ground, and it does that every time. Now, Isaac Newton, does that happen because there's some law of gravity acting on it, or is there some? Well, it kind of just looks that way. It's just accidental. That would be we see the regularist would say, and this is kind of the position that I believe Sean Carroll's taken in that debate, or at least he was defending along that line that particular night, was, oh, okay, I saw the apple fall from the tree. Well, that's a regularity that I see, but I'm not going to attribute that to a law of nature. A necessitarian says there's some objectively existing thing, and from a Christian standpoint, we would call that a secondary cause. We would say God created. By the way, Muslims don't necessarily agree with this. Muslims seem to be a lot occasionalist, where they believe God's acting directly on things and that there aren't necessarily laws of physics. And there are some Christians that defend that, even in the modern day. I think that was Bishop Berkeley, right? So the position I take is that God did create the universe as a separate entity, and I don't know what the nature of how it's governed and what it's doing, but there are objective laws. There's somehow it's enforced, and those laws act and they change things. So there's actually capital E evolution going on. By the way, the nature of time that Dr. Craig and I defend, which is called the tense version or the A version of time, that's how time works also. Dr. Craig would have a heart attack if he heard me mention it this way. If I say time flows, it's actually not a good way in philosophy to say, but that's kind of at the public. That's kind of how time works.
Let's just briefly, if you would, for our listeners, give us a dollar store version of A theory time, if you would.
Yeah.
It's 10:59 a.m.
Oh, is that me? Okay. That's my Siri. Thank you, Siri. I don't know why you said that.
You're welcome.
She's so polite. Anyway, just for people
let me
that
indicate why this is important first. When you're in the cosmological argument, I said that's our base, that's our starting point. Okay, because that's going to show me intellectually whether there's a transcendent cause that I need to deal with, small c cause initially. Is there something that I have that's out there that is the explanation of the universe? Okay, and the second premise there is the universe began to exist, and there's two parts of that. That's part of it is, did the universe have a beginning? And that's the thing that modern cosmology has something to say about, and that's why I do a lot of work in that angle. But the other part, the other half of that is, what's the nature of time? Because there's more than two now, but there's two dominant versions of time out there, which you call the tensed versus the tenseless. Now, in the tensed version, which we defend, also called the A version as opposed to the B version of time, there's such a thing as an objective now. We're saying the present really exists. When there is a now that across the universe that objectively exists and is marching on because time is marching on. And capital E evolution is acting, and we're taking that universe in the present, and as time is marching, we're evolving it and changing it according to laws of physics. Okay, it doesn't sound that controversial, does it? It's actually very controversial in philosophical circles. Okay, so the other way of thinking of time is, it's kind of like, it's called the tenseless version. So if I say August 3rd at 5 o'clock, that is a tenseless version of referring to a moment in time, because it has no reference to an objective present. Okay, so what you have is, time is like a thing that just hangs, and whatever. And think of it like a ruler. Imagine I'm holding a meter stick or a yardstick up, and if I'm holding up a yardstick and you can see the numbers on it, okay, so imagine that that's a representation temporally of what the universe is like. In the B version or tenseless version of time, it's time can have edges to it, but there's no significance to those edges. It's just like the end of a ruler. On the other hand, in the tensed version, you've got an actual moment of creation where no, the universe doesn't exist, and then boom, it exists. Okay, there's an origin event. That's what we mean by things begin to exist, not just is there a beginning. So the philosophy of time is very significant in these debates. And in the Kalam argument, which is the cosmological argument that we're talking about, which is based on the beginning of the universe, a prerequisite of the conclusion is this nature of time, that evolution is a real metaphysical thing in nature. So the strange thing about the cosmological argument, unlike, say, other arguments that go on, is that it's the theists who are arguing in favor of evolution and the atheists who are arguing against it. So it's a switch, okay, compared to what happens in biology, where you got a whole different thing going on.
To sort of break it down simplistically, the Kalam, the tensed A version of time is, to state it in very layman's terms, somebody punched the clock on the microwave and started at 1 minute, and it's growing from there. Time began, or the timer, if you want. Somebody started the stopwatch, and it with a high degree of order, and or low entropy, if you will, high order, low entropy, and the clock started, and even Sean Carroll says in the debate, if this universe is all there is, we have a fine-tuning problem because we have a very low entropic state. Why would the universe be that way? He tries to. It's interesting. He tries to argue that God, if God exists, he made too much. He fine-tuned it way too low. There's way too much low entropy going on at the beginning of the universe. Interesting argument. That
yeah, you're getting into a bunch of different issues together there.
Well, yeah, I didn't.
Dr. Carroll actually says many things in his academic writings that are helpful to us. So, by the way, so we never want to come off as if any of our the people we're having conversations with, Dr. Carroll in this case, are being dishonest or
No, absolutely.
a rhetorical force. No, because he's saying a lot of things that are statement against interest also, and you just named one of them, because he really believes the entropy thing is kind of wall that off, treat it as a separate issue. Actually, let me talk about the time and then transition to the entropy,
yeah, sorry.
like.
Yeah.
Okay. Because to make it clear, here's another way to talk about what Dr. Craig believes about the nature of time. He says the past and the future don't exist, only the present exists. Okay, and the present becomes the future. Okay, while in the tenseless or B version of time, the past and there is actually no objective path. It's just all the whole timeline just exists together. Everything exists. So George Washington still exists. Ancient Greece still exists. Whatever the future is already exists. And it's just there. Okay. And like a ruler, I can just point to a spot on it and say, what's going on now? Okay. So George Washington is still crossing the Delaware and he's still there doing it. Okay. So in that particular version of time. So that's one thing. So we'll just call it the common sense view of time, that the present really looks real given the eye test. Okay. It takes a lot of education to disabuse yourself of the idea. You have to say, I don't believe what my eyes are seeing. Okay. So the other thing, you transitioned to an issue which is about entropy and what that has to do with time. And that folds into two different issues. One of them has to do with the beginning of the universe, or the cosmological argument, and another has to do with the fine-tuning or design argument. Here's a really good charitable way of getting at what Sean Carroll was trying to say. He was trying to make the world safe for atheism, for a universe that does have a beginning to it. As he said, because he's taken on the first premise. He's saying, I don't care if the universe had a beginning. And he was trying to do it not by attacking time, the philosophy of time, which is what I thought that Tim Maudlin was going to do and didn't. What he was saying is, because causation isn't what you think it is, it doesn't matter if the universe had a beginning. Okay, so, but as a subsidiary point, and this is him later in the debate, he says, I can show you models that are beginningless, that cosmologists are talking about. And so he had an argument against both the first and the second premise, which is fine. That's a good way to do it. Okay, so, and one of the reasons I think he goes that route is because a lot of the things he says in his academic writings tend to be helpful toward the Coulomb argument. So he believes in something called the past hypothesis. You know what the past hypothesis is? That, and here's the example that he'll use in some of his writings. Let's say that you want to know, okay, you walk into a room and you see nobody's in there, but you see a glass with ice cubes in it. Does that imply anything about whether someone was in that room recently? The answer is yes, because ice cubes melt. and they're still there. So it can't have been that long ago that someone put the glass down on the table.
Unless it's 10 degrees in the room.
Yeah, yes, I assume that too.
Which it was here in Texas when our power went out. We had a snowmageddon.
Yes, I went to school in Texas for a while, so I know very well how the weather can roll in.
Yeah, we had an awful
8 to 10
winter.
degrees in an afternoon. Yes,
that's
I know.
right. Well, we had an awful winter. Anyway, you're right. So ice cubes imply sentient intelligence, and
Okay,
and
so
recent activity even.
Well, that's not what he's getting at. He's talking strictly about entropy, the measure of disorder, or usable, another way to put it, usable energy.
Usable energy, right.
Okay, yeah. So we have energy sources. That energy itself is conserved in nature. That's the first law of thermodynamics. But it changes form. Mm-hmm. And it changes form in such a way that it goes from useful, meaning you can do mechanical work with it, to useless, which is generally heat.
So a common example would be you put gas in your car and you expend the gas. It goes out of your tailpipe as carbon monoxide. You can't stuff that carbon monoxide back into your car and use it for gas again. This is a classic example, I would say, of energy, of matter and energy changing and becoming useful at one point and then becoming basically useless.
Yeah, so let me tell you, and I can say it in a way that's easily accessible. Okay, so therefore there's a principle, there's no free lunch. There's no perpetual motion machine.
Right, right.
Okay. And however, in cosmology, if you want to build a model which is beginningless, typically you have to say it is a perpetual motion machine. You'll have to say, aha, there's an exception to that, because that's what I need to get my beginningless universe.
Right.
Which isn't something that Sean Carroll necessarily agrees with, by the way. Okay. So he's helpful to us on this particular topic. Okay, because there's a really interesting way that thermodynamics work. Okay, we get, again, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the ice cubes in the glass. Okay, because the universe is kind of like that. When we look at the universe, what we see are that stars are still burning. There's still life sites in the universe, at least at planet Earth. So there's usable energy that's permitting life. That's kind of like the ice cubes in the glass, right? That shows that there's an implication there that the clock hasn't been going for all eternity. Otherwise, all the ice cubes would have melted, all the candles would have burnt out, the stars would have burnt out. And you'll get to what's called the heat death of the universe. It's just a uniform bath of heat, which the energy is all still there, but it's no longer in a usable form. So the very fact that we're here and there's still food to eat, there's still stars burning, is the implication seems to be that there was a beginning to the finite past. That's the basic argument for thermodynamics for the beginning of the universe. Now, once that gets into a whole lot of different sophistication, which we can unpack if you like, about how do you deal with that argument. Let me go into the little.
Well, let's maybe let me take it in this direction and see if this matches where you're thinking, and I could maybe hopefully tee you up for a good shot here. Dr. Carroll, in the lecture, we briefly mentioned this already, but he kind of quips that he went online and Googled 17 different models of the universe that were eternal. And I think this is what you're talking about, what we might call, what you just said, the free lunch models of the universe. And it's interesting. Go ahead.
Are you referring to the part of the debate where he put up a PowerPoint slide that had a list of beginningless models on it? Is that
yes, right.
Okay.
If you really believe that the beginning of the universe is an important piece of evidence for God, an eternal universe with a low entropy state in the middle is not helping your case. What you should be doing is trying to build models, like I said. So the question is, are there realistic models of eternal cosmologies? Well, I spent half an hour on the internet. I was able to come up with about 17 different plausible-looking models of eternal cosmologies. I do not claim that any of these is the right answer. We're nowhere near the right answer yet. But you can come up with objections to every one of these models. You cannot say that they are not eternal.
To me, okay, so here's the question it raises in my lay mind, James. Okay, I'm sitting there in New Orleans and I'm watching this and I'm fascinated by the cosmos. I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a scientist, and I hear Dr. Carroll say, look at all these eternal models of the cosmos. My brain goes immediately to, no, wait a minute. Is eternity a science concept that can be tested? Why are we positing eternal models? And to me, and this comes from my Christianity, but it also just comes from a sort of a common sense perspective, that it seems like you're saying, okay, no, God, I want to make the universe safe for atheism, as you said earlier. And so in order to do that, I have to make something eternal. So I get rid of God, but I'm still left.
And it actually doesn't do that. And I think Sean Carroll agrees with this point. I think that's why he didn't make it his main point in the debate. And he mostly attacked the first premise. But that's why he said, look, it was more like this. I have colleagues that believe they found beginningless models, and here they are. So how come you have to deal with this? Okay, so, but let me bring in two larger points. And this is something, I'll give you something that Stephen Hawking said that I think Sean Carroll would be sympathetic with. And this is the reason that Hawking ended up making the models that he did. What Hawking would say is, and he has a direct quote, I could find the paper and the quote for you. I think I may even have it on Twitter somewhere at my Twitter site. Okay, Hawking said, doing away with the beginning of the universe by positing a past eternal model doesn't solve your God problem at all. Because the thing that philosophically you don't like about the beginning is this thing called a boundary condition, where, why does the universe look the way it does, act the way it does? Why does it have the nature that it does? Okay, that's all defined by this boundary condition. Okay, and the interview that you did with Stephen Meyer, he gives a good example of this, which I think I use too, of let's talk about a guitar string. Okay, there's laws of physics which deal with the vibration of the string, but the nature of exactly what the note is going to sound like is dictated by some additional criteria which is, for example, where are the boundaries that this string is attached to? Okay, so there's a boundary. The beginning of the universe would work somewhat like this. There's a boundary condition which sets up, which if there's a Big Bang explosion, what's going to come out of that explosion, right? And it looks to physicists like that's arbitrary, which drives people like Stephen Hawking nuts, because physicists are naturally people who want to explain things. This is why they're looking for theory of everything. Okay, so what Hawking was saying is all you're doing by positing a past eternal model is taking your boundary condition and moving it to past infinity, which solves nothing about your God problem. Okay, so and that is a very powerful statement. There's a lot of physicists who think that they're solving this problem, and they're not, by positing past eternal universes. And by the way, they're past eternal, beginningless are similar terms, but they don't have to be. They can be slightly different. So most all use the term past eternal. Okay, so that's one problem. Okay, the other problem, and again, I think Sean Carroll's actually sympathetic with us on this, because there's quotes in his academic papers, not just his public writings, about this. If you want a universe like that, so even aside from the fact you haven't solved your problem, can you build a decent past eternal model? And I'm talking strictly here from a thermodynamic perspective. You have to do really tricky things, which Sean Carroll, the way he describes it is it's awfully strange. It's not necessarily wrong, but it just doesn't look right. And here's what you have to do thermodynamically. If you believe that the second law of thermodynamics, which is the disorder, it pretty much is going to go up as time passes. And there's this thing called Poincaré recurrences, which you have to do. That's why you have people like me going and dealing with all the exception conditions. That's what I do in my writings. Okay, so what I'm doing is unpacking this slowly. Let's go the next step up. Okay. Am I going to get a situation where the entropy of the universe can grow from past eternality and still look like it does in the present? Okay, because what the example that we just used about the ice cubes in the glass, or the hot cup of coffee, it looks a lot like if we have stars that are still burning, that you can't have past eternality. But there is a mathematical way of doing that. What you can say, you can set up a mathematical structure where you get a finite amount of entropy increase over an infinite time. And now to me, I would use the term special pleading. That doesn't look right to me. Sean Carroll in his writings uses the word strange. It doesn't look like a viable model. You can do it. You can't look at it and say, haha, logic error. So I'm ruling you out based on a logic error or a math error. But you get a very strange looking model, and you can't really explain how it is that you get there.
So let me see if I can. I'm sorry for interrupting. Let me see if I can explain in a colloquial aspect what you're saying. It would be like, let's say, a past eternal model would be my a never emptying gas tank, right? So I have this unlimited amount of gas. I never have to stop for gas. I just keep going and going and going. But I can do a mathematical fudge.
No, it's not never empty.
It's not never.
Put it that. You actually have a finite amount of gas in there, and yet somehow you have to make that gas last for all eternity.
Okay, so it's backwards.
How are you going to do that, right?
Gotcha.
Because if you turn the engine on, it's going to burn that gas out, and it's going to happen no matter how low your throttle setting is, right? So how do I overcome that? I'm saying mathematically, what I say is I can I can set up a way of dealing with infinity that I burn a finite amount of gas over infinite time. Now, how you do that, they don't specify. They just say that's what happens.
There are some stretches of eternity where you're not driving. Perhaps.
I'm saying there's nothing logically or mathematically wrong with that structure of model. So I can't point at it and say that's there your math error. So I'm not. But it don't sound like you can do it, does it? That's
So
why
there's
Sean Carroll would call it strange.
So there's a difference between conceptual frameworks where the math works. There's logical mathematical consistency, but what the failure is to translate into flesh and blood, into reality as we would understand it. Right? That you can do conceptual math, but
here's another way to put it. Let me get at another point. If you look in these models, and you say, "Can I go visit any point in time in the past?" It turns out that any point in time, any point in this supposedly eternal past that you visit is always a finite time from the Big Bang or the present, us sitting here having this nice interview. We might as well just talk about that time interval. There's no point that you can exist on where you can say, hey, it's really eternity between me and us having this nice conversation on this particular day. Okay, so whenever you look at the model physically as a real physical point you can exist at, there is no past eternality. Yeah. There's only a past eternality if you're just talking abstractly and there's no observers that you can point to and say, what did the observer look at? So it just looks like, I don't want to say a mathematical trick exactly because that implies a motive. That's not right. It's more like I'm sitting here, I want to deal with this issue about the beginning by pushing it arbitrarily into the past.
Would you
can
say
I do it? Yes, I can come up with these thing called static models where there's other ways to do it.
Would you say, James, that what you're talking about basically, if I'm following it, is this is something like what Albert Einstein did when he wanted to park the universe? Like, I don't want it to be moving, so I'm going to throw this little equation in here, which does stop the universe on paper. Is that what's happening here? That we're conceptually adding the lambda and
there's a whole that's called the Einstein static state. That was the original static model. Mm-hmm. So the reason Einstein did that is that when he came up with general relativity, most thinkers in that period and before, I believe that they would have defended an idea that the universe is in a steady state that lasted from all eternity. And then Einstein says, I'm going to do general relativity. And it comes out and it predicts that that's not true at all, that the universe is either in a expanding or contracting state. And Einstein came out not believing his own equations. So he said, I could put this arbitrary factor in there that can tend to balance it between the two tendencies of contraction and expansion. And if I do that, now I've got a model which looks like it's static for all eternity. Okay, and you've got some problems with that. First of all, can you really do that and make it static for all eternity? Because the way that Einstein's model was set up, it's unstable. It's kind of like having a basketball sitting on top of a hill. And as long as nobody touches it, it'll stay there. But the moment there's a tiny little perturbation, it'll roll down the hill, right? So where do you get, and this is not just something that scientists were talking about in 1929, that this is the active discussion that's going on today. It's about, well, what about perturbations and what effects do they have on these static models? And so you have to deal with that the fact that they're very strange looking models, because you have to, like, it's like the irresistible force versus the immovable object. I have to have a thing which stays stable for all eternity. So it has to very powerfully be stable. And at the same time, I have to upset it and make the Big Bang happen. Okay, as at some point the universe goes into the kind of expansion that we see today. Right. So how do you do this push-pull between these two opposed concepts?
Yeah.
And can you build structures that do it? Yeah, but it looks like special pleading to me. And cosmologists like Audrey Matheny and Alex Delankin, Anthony Aguirre, another guy named Key Hyas, I believe, have written papers that suggest that the perturbations that can happen make it unstable anyway. Even if you set up special kind of structures where there's finite expansion over all eternity or finite entropy growth over all eternity, these things, it's not a knockdown argument. This is a likelihood argument. Are these models viable? It just looks like the models don't work anyway. So that's where you end up. Now that's the thermodynamic part of the earlier statement you were talking about with entropy. Thermodynamics seems to provide evidence for beginning to the finite past. There's other models. There's this reversal of the arrow of time models that are out there. Of course, there's oscillating models that you could talk about. Thermodynamics and all of them, once you unpack it, tends to give pretty good evidence in favor of beginning to the finite past.
Okay. Well, I've got a couple of questions. I'm kind of running out of time. I wish we could go on for hours and hours. We certainly could, and we'll have to revisit all of this, James. This has been really fun. We go from Carl Sagan science fiction to Sean Carroll and cosmology. It's great. I know this was an aside that had nothing to do with the context of the debate there in New Orleans, but I do find it fascinating anyway, an insight into Dr. Carroll's mind about theism and God in general. Because as Dr. Craig has often gotten asked after lectures, and I'm sure you've heard it many times, because the kalam by itself doesn't get us to the risen Christ of Scripture. You establish the small c of kalam, and then you make that, and then you do your abductive assessments of what that small c might be. And so, but it's interesting, in Dr. Carroll's opening statement in this debate, he makes several statements about what one would expect, and I see this a lot in the atheist philosophical literature when it's trying to argue against God, what one would expect on naturalism versus what one would expect on theism. And I found Dr. Carroll's expectations to be minimally, I wouldn't even say very persuasive. It just seemed like not even a robust philosophical assumption about what we would expect. He makes statements like, for example, there's no reason for God to give special messages to this or that primitive tribe thousands of years ago. And so it seems like he has this
theological statement, but you're not bringing your authority from cosmology behind it,
right? Yeah,
which is fine.
Yeah, that's
fine.
okay.
What we're talking about, but
right, and that's okay. But it seems like from the perspective in the initial part of the debate, which of course God is God behind all this, it seems right away that Dr. Carroll is in a epistemically very limited, theologically or even philosophically, a very limited view of theism, because he says on the one hand, theism is not well defined, but that is he's making objections to theism.
Remember, there's no objective purposes in an atheist universe where the only thing that happens, even if causes are permitted, which they're, and the efficient causation is the only thing that's out there. But at the moment you allow mind with free will, you can have purposes for things, can't you?
You sure can. Right.
So, God doesn't expect all of us to go out and put up telescopes and look and see if the universe is expanding and try to ferret out using sophisticated reason that these things are going on. And then you painstakingly, I think Kierkegaard made this statement of that. Does God really expect us to sit for our whole lives, and by the time you're age 83, you say, aha, I've proven that God exists. Now I can go and live my life, and then you die.
Right. I got enough Hubble time and all that stuff. Yeah.
No, it can't be that way. So it makes perfect sense that God would cut to the chase. And so what Christians believe, that's a dangerous thing to say exactly, because there's Roman Catholics and Protestants and Eastern. Okay. But I'll make a general statement that there's this unfolding of who God is and his plan that he reveals over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so even what he was saying to who at a particular, the ancient Hebrews say, well, why are we going through the slavery in Egypt and all that? What was he saying to them, and why? And why do they want to march through Sinai and all that? And why did it? Why do we have all the things that happen? God, he's got a plan where he's revealing what you need to know at the time you need to know it. Okay, so the first thing is he's revealing it. And the way he's got to do that is he got to talk to you, because that's the general revelation versus the special revelation. The general revelation, we're out there saying, isn't it wonderful how the universe appears designed?
Yeah.
But it's not telling me necessarily God. Is there, now we get past the what of it to the why of it. And there's actual purpose out there, or a teleological ends to why we're here. So God's telling us, okay, now let me teach you some things over time. A lot of people think, I don't think this is a hard theological point in Christianity, that the earth is like a school where God needs to show you some things.
Mm-hmm.
And here's just a Sinclair belief, which could totally be wrong, and I'm willing to be refuted on it. But there's a difference between book knowledge and experiential knowledge, which might be why Jesus to earth and lived as he did before he was crucified and resurrected. Okay, so God says, I'm going to have to show you some things straight out. Maybe the nature of evil. Maybe that's why a reason why evil exists, and this is part of that. And that's also why it's finite. We say, hey, the world, I'd really like to stay around. I want to search for immortality. God said, no, it's not why you're here. Okay, you're here for this purpose. And I'm going to pull it out of you. And I'm showing you lessons through history. This is why in the Lord's Prayer, where you pray for, lead us not into temptation, what that really is talking about is testing. Like the testing of Job. You say, well, Lord, don't use me. Please don't have me be the cautionary tale so people 10,000 years from now can look back and say, shouldn't have done that. Okay. But those episodes do appear in salvation history. And that's in the Bible. And you say, what those Israelites did during the time of the judges. Yeah. Okay. I can see why that was wrong. Okay. So we can kind of see now. God needs to talk to you in different and that's where the purpose of it is, rather than just the mere existence. We talked at the very beginning, let's come full circle about, is it just enough to exist, or is there more to what humans, sentient beings, are? That why we go out and do space travel? I think there's more to life, and it's enough that you have to have that over mere survival criteria. So that was the initial part of the discussion. Well, now we're kind of back to that. What's the purpose of us being here? Why did God create this school, or however he did it, for whatever purpose? We can talk about that. So he has to talk to you, and that's the special revelation. So yes, would he talk to ancient tribes and do it in a way that they could process? Yes, I believe he would.
Right. Well, and the common objection I hear from a lot of my skeptic friends, and you've heard it too, I'm sure, there's no evidence for God's existence. I mean, it's not a very refined or thoughtful response, because it precludes, the expectations of the naturalist prohibit further inquiry about what how God would reveal himself. I mean, through creation, through scripture. There's that.
That's really strange. Yeah, that's a really strange point. And I talk about that a lot in the article that I wrote for the God and Cosmology book that you held up. There it is.
Yes.
Okay. If you're an atheist, I said atheists come in all stripes. Okay, but some of them will say atheism is a default position. It's not unlike the accusation they make against Christians. Christians say we believe in the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is where faith comes from. That's why you folks don't prove anything. And that's why you're vulnerable to the million superstitions that also don't prove everything. That's why should I pick you over the million superstitions? So that's what atheists, that's the accusation against theism. Then we come back and say, but you think that you're the default position. You don't have to prove everything. Well, that leaves you vulnerable to the million superstition. I said, if I was an atheist, I would not stand on that I would be out there doing the same things that I'm doing as a theist. I would be out there saying, is there evidence for my worldview? And there are positive in the active sense. There are positive arguments for atheism, like the argument from gratuitous evil, the hiddenness argument. Why does God seem like he's not there? You could make, there's other ones. So it'd be on that, but mostly we'd be talking about very similar things. Can I painstakingly go through Kalam arguments, Aquinas-based metaphysical arguments, the cosmological version of the design argument? What does it look like? I'm of the, a lot of us are of that framework that you need to show that things are proven. Do you need that for faith? No, because the Holy Spirit and Christianity. As Dr. Craig would say it, that this plays a ministerial rather than magisterial role. Okay. But even if I was atheist, I would be looking for where the evidence leads you painstakingly. Now, the thing that interferes with that is what we were saying before. The stakes are so high. Am I insignificant? And I mean totally insignificant versus completely significant. So well, if that's the case, then it's very hard to clear-mindedly and painstakingly go through all this. But that's where we are. And I talk about the publicly available evidence. I can't show you the Holy Spirit in my heart as properly basic knowledge telling me God exists, et cetera, et cetera. The things that we can talk about to each other are the publicly available evidence, like we're discussing here. What does that's why we're in modern cosmology discussion. That, by the way, is why in post-Christian society, we treat cosmologists like we used to treat priests 500 years ago. Okay, because they have something to say that does get on the why question and the purpose question, no matter how much the Sean Carrolls and the Stephen Hawkings of the world want to say, no, those aren't valid questions. You still end up right there. And
yeah. I mean, we have Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk spending lots of money to go into the universe and just for a few seconds or a few minutes glimpse the beauty of a vista that few human beings have ever seen. And only 12 people have been 240,000 miles away from us and walked on the surface of another planet. And yet we are driven, or in the, I think this is just a Daniel argument here that Genesis says we are created in the image and likeness of God, and that he has built us into the fabric of the cosmos to resonate with the cosmos. It's made to be discoverable. I think it was I don't know if it was Bill, Dr. Carroll or Dr. Craig in the discussion, or it was something else I read. I forgot where it was. My mind is such a travesty of a jungle of thoughts. But the idea that that we need we need fine tuning to maybe not for human life purposefully in terms of it's not primarily for us. But it has to at least be this way so we can observe the universe, that we have to have these parameters to even make observations and think about them. And of course, it seems like teleologically, when you talk about purpose and intention, that we can't help but resonate with the beauty and the wonder of the universe. There are very few people I encounter who would say the universe is not beautiful or awe-inspiring. Carl Sagan was like, it inspires senses of reverence and awe unbidden, right? That we intuitively know that something, in fact, in Cosmos in 1980, Sagan said something like, our ancestors weren't foolish for worshiping the sun. And doesn't it make sense, since we came from stars, that we should worship the sun and other stars? Doesn't that make sense? We need to be revering something. Why not the very things from which we came? And so, here's this concession that we're not going to not worship. Right, James, that we're going to worship something, whether it's our models or the cosmos itself or hopefully Jesus. We are designed to worship. We're designed to know what this is all about. And I think the very nature of the inquiry, that there's even a profession called cosmology or astronomy, tells you the truth of what the scriptures say. This is a worthy pursuit, worthy of a career that gives you sustenance. It feeds your family, as we've been talking about, right? It's a career move. You can be an astronaut, you can be an astronomer, you can be a cosmologist, you can be an astrophysicist. This is a career of just engaging what God has made. Psalm 111:2. The greater the works of the Lord, they're delighted. They delight in those who delight in them. I forgot. I just killed the verse. The greater the works of the Lord, they are delighted by all who study in them. Something like that. It's over the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. But I think what you're saying, this very question, that I love how you put that, James, that we're looking at cosmologists and astronomers today as having the same kind of stature as the medieval theologians, pondering these wide questions.
Yeah, and we want the public, which we are a part, of course, we want to put them up there on that pedestal, and that's why we pay them lots of money for the books that they write. It's not because they were really interested in the details of the math or something. Wow, isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
It's because of what it has to say for
who we are, right? Who we are. That's right. That's right.
Either way, whatever the answer is.
Yeah.
It's because of the way that we, our very nature, and there's a whole discussion there. Why is our nature that way? Alvin Plantinga, the famous Christian philosopher, maybe the foremost Christian philosopher, he wrote a book a while back he actually assessed the design argument. I don't know if you've read that book. And in it, he said, the most powerful thing about the design argument is not the technical argument, the thing that I and Robin Collins get into. It's this powerful reaction that we have, we call it the design inference, or the design intuition. It's really an intuitional response to the universe. That's the powerful thing that you're triggering. The logical argument is quite separate to that and has its own value. But all of us seem to be, I'll say, designed that way. If you're bringing the atheists into the conversation, we'll say apparently designed. But I don't think they disagree that you look at the heavens and you have this powerful impression that it looks like it's designed. You have to work hard to see Carl Sagan's pale blue dot, as opposed to that is a miracle.
And here is probably one of the most recognizable images for which Dr. Sagan is most well known. It's called the pale blue dot. Now, the pale blue dot was a photograph of Earth taken by the Voyager 1 satellite on February 14th, Valentine's Day, of 1990. Dr. Sagan was integral in getting NASA to turn Voyager around and take pictures of the planets of our solar system as it was going out of the solar system. And so we can thank Dr. Sagan for this wonderful, iconic image called the pale blue dot. Now here you see this shaft of sunlight, and if you look up in the top right corner there, you can see that little white dot. That is Earth from 3.7 billion miles away. That's the pale blue dot. And of course, Dr. Sagan speaks so eloquently about our smallness in the cosmos when he reflects upon the pale blue dot.
Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one part of the dot on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of another part of the dot. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe seem to me challenged by this point of pale light.
You can adopt that mindset, but there's a tension against it. Humans are not like that. You say, why is that? Why do we seek purpose in the why question? And don't tell me that it's not a valid question. That's not gonna. I'm telling you, Dr. Carroll, that's not gonna fly.
Right. Well, that's what he does. He just tries to brute fact
People, if you want to
invalid.
argue that it's an invalid question, then argue that it's an invalid question and show me why I'm meaningless, and I will follow you to that end wherever it goes. Although I don't think that's where you're going to end up. I think that Kalam shows up front. There's a transcendent cause And
Yeah.
that's the beginning of the conversation. And we got to start there and say,
That's right.
who or what is the cause and what does it mean?
That's right. Well, and when Paul's talking about the gospel, the proclamation of the gospel in Romans 10:18, and then of course Romans 1, that God has clearly revealed Himself to us in what He has made, and that's the exhortation. I think that's why we're forever trained skyward. Lots of us live under the domes of light pollution and don't see dark, starry skies. I have the wonderful privilege of doing that out where I live, but we're so blinded to the beauty of the universe. But still, God is drawing our attention upward, and I think as long as He tarries in His coming, there will be cosmologists and Christians and theists and astronomers debating and looking and wondering in awe of the universe. We're not done with that. It's not going to go away. It's there. It's always there. But it reminds us, Psalm 19 is quoted in Romans 10:18, that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the voice of the universe has gone out throughout the whole world. God has demonstrated His invisible attributes to us through what He has made. Even, I think you mentioned it earlier, the skeptics with the comment of the apparent design. I've heard Lawrence Krauss and others say that, Richard Dawkins, even the most outspoken new atheists will concede it all looks designed. There's this illusion of design, but don't take it seriously because it could lead you somewhere, right?
So are all our PhDs and the whole focus of academia in Western society, are they leading us painstakingly through the difficulties of showing us that everything that we see? Okay, we'll follow that course as I just said I would with Dr. Carroll, and if you end up there, fine. Or is it the opposite? The emperor has no clothes. That you can look at it and say, or R.C. Sproul used to argue this. He'd say it takes a PhD to believe, to force yourself to believe all this thing about the B variant of time and these mathematical constructs that somehow let expansion of the universe be finite over infinite time. You have to very carefully do all of these things that to me look like special pleading. And if you do that, okay, maybe you can appear to get where you'd like to go. But I believe the emperor has no clothes.
That's right. That's my conclusion too. That it's time to stand for the truth and participate in the conversation. And this is not just for academia. There was like 900 people that showed up to this. They packed the chapel there in New Orleans. As far as it's what Bob says in the beginning of the book. There was several hundred people there. So it's phenomenal interest in this topic. And I know in 2020, when I was at New Orleans for Defend 2020, my boss James Walker knows Bob, and they got me to do a breakout session. It was like, yay! It was very last minute, but I was very thankful and very excited about it. And I did a breakout session on how the heavens declare the glory of God. They put me into a little classroom, thinking nobody knows who Ray is. I mean, nobody knows nobody. I'm a nobody, and people are like, don't worry about it. You might have 10 or 15 people show up. James, I had unexpectedly, delightedly, I had 60 people in there, and people were sitting on the floor. It was really cool, So there's an interest out there.
And hopefully in 2022, COVID will go away, and we can do that again. Right?
That's right. Well, Defend 2022 is on the mat right now. It's in the stages of being planned. And so hopefully that will go through. Well, James, thank you for a wonderful conversation and your wonderful insights. This was just so fun. We go from science fiction to more science fiction, and to what is science, what is philosophy, what is theology, and an excellent discussion. I really enjoyed it. Very fun. Tell our friends who are fascinated by our rambling conversation where they can find more of your work. Where can we find James Sinclair's thoughts on the cosmos out there in the universe? Okay.
Well, here's a book put out by Reasons to Believe, written by Jeff Swearink, who's the astrophysicist in Heros, called Escaping the Beginning.
Okay.
This talks a lot about all these topics, fine-tuning, beginning of the universe. And I did not write the book, but I was significantly involved in that book.
Excellent.
Of course, we mentioned God and Cosmology. So that you get reasons.org or Amazon.com. God and Cosmology. I don't think you can you get this on Kindle yet? I think you can.
I don't know.
It might still be expensive. the original article, Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. You can read
Yes,
that.
that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this has not just our article, but a whole host of arguments for a cumulative case in favor of Christianity. This is kind of hard. This is one Dr. Craig and I published an academic article in this, which is a follow-up to the Blackwell
Okay.
article. I'm just showing you where things are that I've.
Oh yeah, no, this is great. I didn't even know a couple of these. This is fantastic.
Let's see. And of course, I'm on Twitter, and it's yeah. So yeah. I don't have it in front of me, but the article that Jesuit priest Father Robert Spitzer.
Yeah, we'll link all of that. I'll put the Twitter. I'll put your book references. I'll put everything down in there, in the magic link box, and people can follow up with your work with Dr. William Lane Craig and all the other things that you do cosmologically. Thank you, James Sinclair. And
let me note that before we leave. Reasonablefaith.org. That's Dr. Craig, and reasons.org. That's Reasons to Believe.
Gotcha. And by the way, you maybe not know this, I just interviewed Hugh yesterday. No, it was 2 days ago. No, 2 days ago. I interviewed Dr. Ross for flood geology. We did a special on young Earth, old Earth, flood geology.
Oh, so you get into the old Earth versus young Earth. Okay, that's where angels fear to tread.
We don't. We just go, here's young Earth. So we literally, it wasn't a live debate, but we took Institute for Creation Research and we took Reasons to Believe, and we said, give us your best stories. So we got a geologist from ICR, and we got Hugh from RTB, and what we were looking for was a respectful, mutual respect. So why don't you wrap up with some closing thoughts? You know, why is this important for us folks that shop at Target and don't really look up at the sky or don't really know anything about fancy theoretical cosmology? Why should we care about what we're talking about, James?
It's all about meaning and purpose to life and why we're here. And if God exists, then he has a purpose for you. Don't you want to know about it? If he doesn't exist, what does that mean? All right, so that's why the debate between Dr. Carroll and Dr. Craig, why it got as much attention as it did, instead of it being some dry academic debate that no one cares about, small points in philosophy. I said cosmologists end up like our modern day priests because people want to know if there's meaning and importance to their lives, and how they should be treating each other and what they're doing. Yeah. And you also want to know, and there's a lot of people out there like I think your audience is going to be, that you need to see the evidence for things and see where the evidence goes and where it lies. So you don't want these gatekeepers out there saying, don't look at this, you're not allowed to look at that, don't look at that, this doesn't matter. That's not going to stop our audience here. We have to track down these issues and know what the evidence says about it. And that's the nature of why there was a debate and why there still is one. And that's kind of what we do. I think that's what you're doing. Also,
try to bring more people into this conversation.
We want to know what can be known and what can be shared. That's why I call publicly available information. What is it possible to know about whether God exists, and if God exists, who God is, and what he has to say to us, and what is everything about, and what are we doing? And we're living our lives right now, so I don't have time to spend 50 years trying to figure this out. What can I know now that informs my life so that I move forward? If Jesus really is God out there, and there's salvation and redemption, like the author Nancy Percy talks about this a lot, that everyone has a worldview and there's redemption in it from somewhere. And so, because the world, we see that there's evil and wrong in it, and is it redeemed? Okay, and so the world is redeemed. If I want to know if that's true or not, and if, like I was in my Baptist church back when I was age 10 or something, and I was convicted sitting in the pew saying, have I done wrong to others? Yes, I have. What does that mean? Can I ask forgiveness? Can there be forgiveness? Can I try to make right what I've done. And ultimately, where are we going after this? What are we here for? Is there an after, and what are we supposed to do there?
Excellent.
So all of this leads into that, and that's
Right.
why most people are interested in it and will continue to be.
Right. So then when we look at the stars, we are ultimately, it's like the stars, from a scientific perspective, the stars elicit photons, right? These tiny little massless light particles that have been traveling and traveling and traveling. They literally enter our eye, trigger this thing called the 11 cis retina, whatever that is, I'm not sure, but it's a light switch that tells your brain light is here. And it has a message, and immediately we see these little photons from these distant worlds, and we're like, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. That is so fantastically beautiful. I went out this morning and saw the constellation of Pegasus above my head. Orion is coming up on the horizon shortly in the next week or two. I'll be able to see it. Initially, when I see Orion come up before the sun, I know fall and winter are on the way. It's fantastic, but it's so beautiful. I love dark skies. It triggers all those thoughts. David in Psalm 8, as we began our conversation, that what is when I consider thy heavens, the works of thy fingers, the sun and the moon and the stars which thou hast created. What is man that you're mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? James Sinclair, physicist extraordinaire, cosmologically in tune with the fine-tuning and the origin of the universe, cosmogony, a helpmeet to Bill Craig, and a wonderful gentleman and a scholar. Thank you so much, James, for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And to my mind, it's almost undeniable that God's existence is much more probable given the evidence that we have for the beginning of the universe and the fine-tuning of the universe, and therefore contemporary cosmology is strongly confirmatory of theism.
It's a really interesting question. I would have to really delve into some of the historical data, but in terms of somebody, an iconic person who, was like really, I think by modern standards would be considered a really enlightened hippie. And I really admire that, and somebody who really, I think that's a really wonderful thing, and somebody who really was interested in treating people equally, and who didn't see a lot of the distinctions between groups that are so central to the way we organize ourselves today, sadly.
But your dad, from the Contact quote, your dad was not a mythicist. He did believe in the existence of Jesus of Nazareth as a person, anyway, correct?
I think so. I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask my mom. I don't know. I think so. We have to. Yeah. Well,